But let's get still for just a moment. We like to remember that the Ten Commandments all build on the first commandment. And the first commandment, you recall, is thou shalt have no other gods before me. Realization of one God, one substance, one life, one source, one mind, one flow of love. So we turn from the feeling of separation and diversity and duality in our lives to the realization of oneness, where we know that we are at one with the source of life and substance and wisdom, love and peace. And in this consciousness of oneness we are free from tension and strain, free from anxiety and concern, free from the tendency to have inordinate desires for things and experiences out there, knowing that the source of our good is within ourselves. And so in this consciousness we go forward in this hour, and we are grateful for the opportunity to experience something beautiful, something wonderful. And we know that what we experience is not so much what happens to us, but what happens in us, out of the flow of our own superconsciousness. And so we're ready, we're open, we're receptive. We're grateful even now in advance for the realization that we will each one go forth from here tonight with a new perspective, a new insight, a new consciousness, a greater ability to cope with all of the changing, challenging situations of life. And we give thanks for this. Amen. All right, let's take another look at the Ten Commandments, basically tonight the 10th. First of all, a little look back. I have been reiterating a few statements which I feel are important that we confront ourselves with. The idea that the term, the Ten Commandments, is the classic religious cliché. It's unfortunate that we say this, but it's important that we understand it. As I have mentioned time and time again, that in all my years that I've heard people make reference to such statements as, all we need is to live by the Ten Commandments and we'd have no problems, and if people in the world would live by the Ten Commandments, we would have no wars, we would have no crime, we would have no problems in our communities. I have never yet, on trying to pin people down, I've never yet found any one of those persons that have made that statement that knew the Ten Commandments, that could say number one is so-and-so, number two is so-and-so. Usually, after a great deal of embarrassment, the person will confess that maybe he remembers one or two or three of them. And yet, all his life he's been saying we should live by the Ten Commandments and everything will be fine. So it's the great religious cliché, the great cover-up. And we have been taught, most of us, the importance of keeping the commandments. And we've kept them all too well, all packaged, all wrapped up, and all beribboned, and perhaps like the Bible in our home sitting on a stand by the table where everybody can see it as an evidence that at least we believe there is a Bible, and we believe what's in it even if we don't know what it is. And so we have kept the commandments. And my feeling is that it is important that now it's time to learn how to break the commandments, and to break them one by one, and to break them down into their fundamental spiritual principles. And I know years ago when I started playing with this, my feeling was, as it is about all things religious, if you can take it apart and find there is something deeply involved, some tremendous spiritual principles involved, and let's get to the heart of them and use them. If we don't find those principles involved, then let's scrap them. Let's forget this nonsense. Let's forget talking about the Ten Commandments and how important it is to life. And I hope that as those of you who followed along with us have considered the commandments from week to week, I hope that you have come to realize, perhaps shockingly, that there's much more in this code than you had suspected or had previously known. And certainly there's an awful lot more involved in it than we've discussed. Every single week we've come to the conclusion that we hardly have time to really get started in dealing with the commandment and its tremendous implications. So tonight, let's think a little bit about the 10th commandment. Very significant, very important one. I think one that we find will pinch a little bit. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. You shall not covet. The word covet is an interesting word. I wonder how many of you realize that the word covet comes from the same root as the word Cupid. That actually it means love in terms of passion. And for this reason, I think it's important that we understand that coveting in its root meaning is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with coveting. The problem is what we covet and the way we covet and the direction we covet. Now, obviously, the word covet has been given a more general connotation, and so we think of coveting as inordinate desire or greed or avariciousness. But in its purest sense, the problem or the sin is not in the coveting, but it is in that which is coveted. For instance, Jesus places a great emphasis upon the thought rather than the experience, and Paul gives this statement, which is often misquoted relative to money. So often it's said money is the root of all evil, but this isn't true. Money is not the source of evil at all, but it is the love of money which is the root of all evil. And the love of money is covetousness in its general implication, you see. Now that, obviously, we wouldn't say there's anything wrong with love, but it's what we love. If we love money, if we love things, then we're coveting. You see, then this is the thing that leads to our problems. But love of itself is a beautiful thing. So in the sense, in its highest meaning, the passion of coveting is a very important state of consciousness. But Jesus says, blessed are they that do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. This hunger and thirst is a coveting. But hunger and thirst after righteousness, hunger and thirst to realize the oneness within us of this creative process. And when our coveting is directed toward the inner flow, then, you see, we shall be filled. Then we shall also have the things which otherwise we seek for in our avaricious approach to things out here in the world. So Jesus turns the thing around as he does all the commandments. To covet means to desire, means to long for, means to want passionately. And if we're established in the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, or the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one. Or in the second commandment, thou shalt not make any graven images, that we do not worship false gods. If we're established in these concepts, then we covet the inner process, the inner kingdom, and passionately desire to get into the flow and keep into the flow. And in this sense, the coveting, you see, is a very right attitude. But this is to hunger and thirst and to desire with all our heart, mind, and soul to have the inner experience of oneness. Now, the great tragedy of man is the prevalent belief that life is to be lived from the outside, that it's all to be found out here. This is the thing that most of us have been confused with, frustrated with, corrupted with. Our whole system is based on it. From the very beginning of our lives, we're conditioned to believe it, that it's all out here, that you go out into the world to make money, to get things, to get love, to find people. Everything is out here. And so we're constantly urged to go and get it, go and get it. And if a person doesn't have any get up and go, then, he says his get up and go got up and went or something or other. But it becomes a fixation, you see. Everything is out there. the car, the house, the handsome man, the beautiful woman. Everything is out there. But the point is, you see, ultimately we must come to realize that unless we get a clear perspective of our relationship to life as an inner flow, then we're constantly going to be influenced by every passing change or pattern or style or hawker who says, this is where it is, come to me. And we'll find that we're deluded into trying to achieve what someone calls middle-class prestige, and if we're middle-class, then upper-class prestige, and we're trying to gain acceptance. We're trying, perhaps a man is trying to be a virile male by acquiring certain things or wearing certain styles or in some way conforming to some outer thing, and the woman has the same problems of trying to keep up with what the other women do and so forth. But the unfortunate part is, all of this leads to the problem of covetousness. It's hungering passionately for something that's out there. And in the process, and that's the real tragedy, the very act of coveting things out there, no matter what it is, shuts us off from the inner flow. And therein we intend, in a sense, destroy ourselves, because we cut off the real source of our life. This is why Jesus points out in the sort of a living parable with the rich young ruler who came to Jesus, you remember, and he wanted to be a disciple. Jesus quizzed him a little bit, and he asked him the great cliche, the laws, and the man said, yes, I have kept the commandments all my life, kept them packaged like we all do. And so Jesus said, all right, this is fine, but one thing more. He had a test for him. He said, now you go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. And it says the man turned sorrowfully away because he had great possessions. He didn't have possessions at all. Possessions had him. Jesus was testing him, and it was a very important test, you see, because if he could have given everything he had away, he wouldn't have had to give everything away. But the fact that he couldn't give it away meant that he was enslaved to it. And therefore his whole consciousness was hung up on the things out here which he had acquired through the attitude of covetousness. Now, this is a very challenging thing, of course, when we see it in deeper dimensions. We've tended to make a false god of money, of course, because money has become the symbol of what we require to get the things out there. And so money becomes probably the major source of covetousness. We covet more money or the power that money will bring. Covetousness is one of the greatest human problems of mankind. Most personal and certainly international conflicts arise out of envy and jealousy and selfishly desiring something that belongs to somebody else, which is covetousness. For instance, right now, there are those nations and certain politicians and leaders within the nations who are hungrily coveting the oil fields of Arabia. And so it has always been. And as you look back in history, we're not always able to see it at the time, but as we look back upon wars in history, practically every war the world has ever known was based on covetousness. The Second World War, for instance, at the time we were not really interested in seeing this because we get all hung up during wars in waving flags and patriotism and so forth. When you can look back on it after 25 years, you find that there was a great problem involved in the world at that time in the fight for the sources of rubber in the East Indies and the oil fields and so forth. The same problems we have today. Covetousness. And this same attitude is the problem of every one of us, because covetousness is exploited creatively and beautifully creatively, very subtly creatively, by a whole industry. It's devoted in getting people to covet things and then to go out and buy them, often on credit, to buy things that often the person can ill afford, and then later looks back on and says, what on earth did I buy that for? And it all began somewhere with a picture in the magazine or in the newspaper, an ad on television. And again, we don't mean to put down an industry, but there are people, very creative minds, who toil upwards in the night on Madison Avenue to find ways to whet the acquisitive instinct of the individual and to get him to covet something. And some say, well, now actually you're touching at the jugular vein of our whole economic structure. Our society of prosperity is built upon this process of people buying and selling and so forth, and all this is so very true. But we need to understand ourselves involved and to realize that unless we control this covetous instinct in terms of hungering and thirsting for the world out here, shutting off the flow of the creativity within ourselves, that something is lost. And you remember Jesus said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? I don't know about you, but I suppose every home contains things somewhere, under the bed or on the wall or somewhere, or in a cupboard, things that are the fruits of covetousness, which came out of some moment of buying something as a result of a advertising appeal, probably out of a sense of insecurity or a feeling that this will give me the kind of prestige that I want to be accepted, possibly from what one writer calls a sense of mental gluttony. But covetousness is a great problem. Shakespeare says, those that much covet are with gain so fond that what they have not, that which they possess, they scatter and unloose it from their bond, and so by hoping more they have but less. So says Shakespeare. Covetousness is a form of stealing, the 8th commandment. It's also an adultery of the mind, the 7th commandment. We see how these commandments are all interlaced. But the great truth that is overlooked in this whole general matter of covetousness is that there is an abundance for all. That we live in a universe that is whole. This is the 1st commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The Lord God is one, whole, complete, total. We live and move and have our being in this allness of God, the allness of substance, the allness of life. And there is a divine action within us that is always working to reveal to us and to express through us that which makes for the kind of prosperity and fulfillment that we hunger and thirst for. And as Jesus says, it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So in a way, we're looking in the wrong direction. And it's unfortunate. So that for which we humanly and selfishly covet out here, we could easily have if we could hunger and thirst within ourselves for the realization of our own oneness. But in coveting it out here, we may, by hook or crook or even by metaphysical treatment, demonstrate that thing out here that we covet, and yet gain it at the expense of our spiritual growth rather than out of the expanse of our growth. So never judge another person. Don't assume that because a person has things that means he is covetous. The point is not the things themselves, but the attitude about them and what has happened to the person in the process of accumulating them and in maintaining them and living with them. And we can never know that about another person. All we can do is try to find it about ourselves. So we need then to try to get this awareness of the allness of things, living in a total universe that is complete and replete with substance and abundance. And to try to understand that whenever there is the little twinge of covetousness in our consciousness, that as Emily Cady talks about it in terms of desire, which is another way of dealing with it, she says it is God tapping at the door of your heart, seeking to manifest in your life with this or that or the other, you see. To realize then that which you hunger and thirst for out here is but an inner presentiment, in other words, of the flow of the divine process within. If we turn and acknowledge that process and get the realization of our oneness and seek to expand our awareness of ourselves, then the things too may come. They will come easily, they will come without effort, and they will come without our ever having to skip a beat in terms of losing our sense of priorities or losing our interest in the coordinated processes of life. And the things will come and will fit in an orderly way to an orderly life. And therein lies the difference. You see, coveting something that another person has, this is what so often happens to us. We are constantly involved in an interrelationship with people, and you meet someone on the street or you go to the office and there is someone who has a new fur coat or a new wristwatch, or he drives up in a new automobile. And so often there's that feeling, the green-eyed monster of jealousy. Why should he have that? Why can't I? I'm a truth student. I should be able to demonstrate the law. So therefore, I want that. I want it, just like the little child. I want it. Gimme, gimme, gimme. I want it too. And the point is, this is like dealing with shadows. Because if we understand the law, now, and there's no point in trying to judge the other person and try to figure out how or why he demonstrated what he has. The important thing is to see it in terms of law. And when you see some beautiful manifestation in the life of another person, rather than saying, how does he rate that, or why can't I rate that, the important thing is to see it as an expression, as a manifestation of a process, and rejoice and give thanks that the process works. That means that unless you develop the capability, and it takes some effort sometimes, of sincerely being grateful for the good that any other person has, you're inclined to give in to covetousness yourself. In other words, someone comes up with a new car, feel just as grateful that he has it as you would feel if you had it, almost at least. Now that seems almost beyond achievement, but this is the direction we have to go, because what it does do is it helps us to keep in the flow of the divine process. It helps us to know that this has been achieved, this manifestation has come because the law is working. If we see an airplane fly, we know that something heavier than air can fly. So praise God, we know it. And that which has been done can be done. That which God has done, God can do. So that if someone else has done it, that proves that the law works. Praise God for that. Praise God that the law works in wonderful ways. It works to manifest a lovely coat that looks so fitting upon that person. If I stop being jealous about it, I'll admit it. It looks beautiful. So the law works. So in the same way, the law can work for me, through my consciousness. Not by saying, gee, I wish I had that. And the only way we can cut ourselves away from this outward covetousness or this inordinate desire or passion that leads to envy and jealousy is to appreciate it. Appreciate where it is. To really turn our whole consciousness into a rejoicing and thanksgiving that God works in strange and wondrous ways, and isn't it beautiful? One way to see this in terms of the divine process of abundance in an orderly universe, think of the sunshine. I don't know how many of you are addicts to the sun or sunbathers, but I expect many of you are at times when you're able. But just imagine on a summer day in this particular time zone, and we'll say it's about 12 noon, and you're sitting out somewhere on the beach or on the roof of your apartment or in a yard somewhere bathing in the sun. And you look over and see someone else bathing in the sun. Now, you understand this whole process. It comes natural to us because we've grown up in it. So you don't feel jealous that he's getting the sun, or you don't wonder that maybe he's getting more than you are, or wonder if he's taking sun away from you by his bathing in the sun. Conceivably, if you want to imagine it for a moment, every single man, woman, and child in this whole area, all the way from Canada to Mexico, or to Central America, could be bathing in the sun at the very self-same moment and nobody taking anything away from anybody else. You see, when we deal with the idea of substance, and usually in some way the idea of covetousness is related to some application of substance, not always, it may also be for relationships and so forth and love, but I think we can better understand it with substance, that there is a feeling that substance works in certain places, but that if it works here, then it's taken it away from somebody else there. And if I get it, I've got to get there first to get ahead of the other fellow so he won't get it. And, the victory goes to the fastest and so forth, And we need to try to get this idea of substance as divine law, not as a product. I mean, in its specialized sense, it becomes form, but in its unspecialized sense, it's principle. Think of it like the law of mathematics. We all take out a pencil and paper and we write on it 2 plus 2 and draw a line. We ponder for a moment and we write 4. Everybody in the room, we all do this together. How does the law of mathematics react to this? Is there a feeling that there's a strain on it? Or can you imagine every single man, woman, and child who is able to take a pencil in hand and write with whatever hieroglyphics he used in the whole world, billions of them all writing on the sand or on a piece of paper or on a slate or whatever he uses, writing 2 plus 2 and getting 4? Do you imagine that the law of mathematics would say, ouch? No, because we know that principle is not exhausted ever in its application. Substance can never be exhausted. Substance is. That's what the word substance means, that which stands under. It's not the outer manifestation, but it's that which stands under the manifestation. It's a divine law. It's a principle. And when we understand that, you see, then we get a whole new perception of economics, spiritual economics. Certainly we know that in the world of practical economics we have all sorts of laws that pertain, but there are laws and there are laws. And as Thoreau says, when one understands the higher law, he lives with the license of a higher order of beings. When you understand the divine law of economics, the divine law of the limitlessness of substance, and there's no need any longer to say, oh, gee, I just wish I could have that and I could have that. The very act of wishing it comes out of the consciousness that says, you're one with substance. Stop wishing. Stop wanting. Stop yearning. Stop being jealous or envious. Stop looking out here and saying, I want that and I want that and I want that. Because all of this outer act of covetousness, subtly, but in a very real sense, cuts us off from the inner flow. And the very urge to get it, when it's directed out here, is the very thing that keeps us from having it, or makes it so hard to have it, or if we do get it, makes it so very difficult to live with. Now this is a very important fundamental of prosperity, and it's a very important one because actually, and this is one of the most difficult applications of this law of covetousness, there is such a thing as metaphysical covetousness. You see, many folks, and I suppose if we're honest, maybe practically all of us, first became involved in this study or this insight of truth or this teaching or unity or metaphysics or whatever because it seemed to promise us answers to certain things in life. In many cases, it seemed to promise that we could overcome our inadequacy, that we could achieve more and be more and have more and so forth. Isn't that right? Isn't that true? Isn't that somehow how all of us became involved in this in the first place? So the point is, it's perfectly natural to have the desire for more, but what happens in our metaphysical study is that sometimes by misunderstanding and misapplying the teaching, and sometimes by subtly erroneously teaching the principles involved, we are goaded on into covetousness. In other words, quite often the teaching or the teacher may subtly say or imply, or we think he says or implies, you see that car out there? You want it? You can have it. Take the treatment, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, get it into your mind, fill your mind with the consciousness of the car, and you can have a car just like anybody else can. And there is so much in our whole metaphysical approach that becomes just glossed over covetousness, using metaphysics as a means of making covetousness work. Now, I know I say this against the grain of a great deal of the presentation of the idea of prosperity as a principle. So I'm not saying that one cannot achieve or one cannot have or one cannot accomplish anything, because the law is limitless. But the important thing is that as long as we start with the inordinate desire, the passionate desire to have the thing, and then use the principle to get the thing, that we're working out here. And that was our problem in the first place. That's the great problem of life. So I said before that we've been so preconditioned with the idea that life is all out here. And if we use metaphysics just as a means of rearranging things out here and not opening the flow of our inner process, then we're deluding ourselves. And we're building up for all sorts of other kinds of problems that we're not aware of at the moment, but probably some of us, in looking back, realize that we've experienced them. The kind of frustrations that come even though you know that you can use a metaphysical treatment to get anything you want. I have given a great deal of thought and study and personal meditation to this whole thought for a good while. And I find myself greatly concerned through the implications of some of the related fields to metaphysics. For instance, the very interesting and very intriguing idea of self-image psychology, that you can change your self-image and thus you can, by getting a new image of yourself, you can go out and become a successful person, a radiant person, and a confident person, and so forth. And it's great and it's wonderful. But the problem involved in this is that if we do not turn from the thing out here that we're looking at, that we've been excited by, the radiant, successful person, when we've said, I want to be like that, if we do not turn from that and turn within ourselves to get the sense of the divine image, of that pattern which the infinite is seeking to project as us, then we may change the self-image. But what we've really done is patterned this image after something out here, and our great desire, our covetousness, is to be like he is, or to be like she is, to be that kind of a person. And so we've actually created the image of that person in our subconscious mind. And just like one of these great big outdoor advertising boards where they paste a whole new display over the old one, we paste on a new image in our subconscious mind. And we hold this image before us. Oh, it delights us. And we love to play with it, because it's an image of a radiant, positive person, and we put on a smile and we shake hands and we're very gregarious, and it's marvelous that we have this new self-image, and it really works for a while. But, someone once said a person is what he is in the dark. And so, all too often, in back of this new self-image that we've acquired, back of this facade that we've pasted over, is the same scared, timid little person that we always were. And so, when we go to our room at night and get into the quiet of our room and we're by ourselves and the lights are out and we sit on the edge of the bed, we've removed our clothes and all the facade and all the trappings that go along with it, and feel that moment of just being with ourselves, then we begin to get a little greater picture, if we're willing to look at it, of what our real image is. Or when we awaken in the morning or awaken in the middle of the night and we're all alone. At this moment, perhaps we have a chance of seeing it. We talked to a man just the other night, a psychiatrist, actually, who's made some marvelous new discoveries for himself. Nothing tremendously innovational, but they're discoveries that have caused him to proclaim that after 25 years of butchering people in psychiatry, he's just now beginning to understand. And he said that in working with people, for instance, he does a great deal of prison psychiatry, and he mentioned working with alcoholics and addicts and so forth. And he said that so often people have psychiatric treatment for problems of addiction of one kind or another, and they take the treatments when they're sober or when they're not under the influence of drugs. And he said a psychiatrist has no way in which he can really work with you and know what you are or what is really going involved behind the facade, the game we all play, unless he could see them when they were drunk, unless he could see them when they were under the narcotics. And he was bemoaning the problem of dealing with people in prison, because in prison they were cut off from the supply, and therefore the alcoholic didn't have alcohol and the addict didn't have his drugs, and he was trying to help them. And he discovered that this was an almost impassable barrier, because in some way the person was involved in this kind of addiction because he was trying to satisfy his inner yearning of the person behind the facade, the little scared person back of it all. And so under the influence of whatever it might be, he was a little freer in expressing his own inner self. It may have been hostilities, it may have been all sorts of anger, frustration, confusion, but this is really himself at that particular time, and he needs to face up to that. At least this is what this psychiatrist says. As I say, he hasn't come up with any answers for it yet, but it has been a great discovery to him, and he realizes that he's been working for years, and in his words, he said, I'm really almost guilty over the people that I've butchered, because I feel I haven't really understood after all these years of working with people. But the important thing is then that this whole matter of getting a new self-image can very easily be based upon pure and simple upon covetousness, coveting something, coveting a new glamorous demeanor, a new confident air, and so forth, coveting it because I see it out there somewhere. This, for instance, is the complication and the confusion that so often is involved in a technique which many folks in Unity use, and which I say can be helpful if we get the right attitude about it, and that's the idea of treasure mapping. Same thing. You know, there are those who say if you want some things, create a treasure map. You cut out little pictures out of magazines and so forth, and you put it on a sheet of postcard paper of some kind and set it up on the wall, and you look at these things. It has a picture of how you'd like to be, and the picture of your home and your car and all these things. Treasure map for success and so forth. As I say, this can be effective. It can be. It can also mislead, and it also can create a lot of deferred problems for ourselves. The intent of it, originally, I think is good, because the intent is that if you see something out here, acknowledge it, accept it, give thanks for it, appreciate it, love it, but not love it with the inordinate passion to possess it. Love it where it is. You pass by a house every day, it's a lovely house, it's beautiful. Drink it into your consciousness. Just like when you go to the art gallery and you see paintings. You see a painting in an art gallery, you love to go there and see it. It's not often, I think, that you say, gee, I'd like to have that in my home. Usually they're too big. That's the reason we don't, probably. No, but we go there because we enjoy it. And we go to listen to music, go to the symphony or the opera or whatever, because we enjoy it, we appreciate it. We don't want to take it with us. We don't want to passionately possess it. We enjoy it. We get it into our consciousness. And this is what the intent of the treasure map thing was. To get the sense of enjoying it and appreciating it like a picture. But so often it is totally perverted and sometimes is mistaught as being a way of getting these things into your subconscious mind so you can have them too. Covetousness. Purely and simply covetousness. And in doing this, as I say, we create all sorts of problems for ourselves. Now, it's not easy to get this thing in balance. A man was telling me some time ago, a man who lives somewhere up in the 80s on Madison Avenue, and he works down in the 50s. And so he walks the 30 blocks down Madison Avenue every day for his exercise, which I think is great. And he has a particular way he always walks, and there's a shop that he walks by. And in the window of this shop, I can't remember now if it was a jeweler's shop or an antique shop or an art shop, I'm not sure. But there's some sort of an art piece that for a long period of time was displayed in the window. And as he walked by this shop, every day he would stop for probably a couple of minutes and just kind of enjoy this art piece. It was one of his, as he says later, it was just one of my prized possessions without possessing. It was a part of his life. He loved it. You know, it's just like having a beautiful landscape or driving up the Hudson and enjoying the river when you go by. It was a part of his morning refreshment. He enjoyed this piece, and every day he stopped and looked at it. He never, he said, had the slightest twinge of desire to have it, to take it home, to buy it, never even went in to find out how much it was. He just loved it. He appreciated it. One day, after, he says, a long time this happened, one day he went by and it wasn't there anymore. He couldn't wait until he could get back when the store was open, went in and talked to the merchant and find out what happened. The man said, well, I have a buyer for it, and they've put some money down on it, and I guess we're going to sell it. He left, went back to work, and for days he worried about this thing. I can't let it go. Now he had the passion to possess it. And so finally he went back and he talked the man with a little extra money under the table and everything. He talked the man into letting him buy it. Paid a good price for it, probably more than he should have. But he took it home and he was just delighted now he had his piece. And he hung it up in his study. Couldn't stand it there. Tried different places in the house. It didn't fit. Nowhere. But he had it. He'd paid all his money for it. He had to use it, so he had it around different places, and gradually he began to resent it. He began to feel terrible about himself. He felt guilty for spending the money. He felt that it was a terrible thing that he'd done, and he resented the piece, and then finally he said, I got to get rid of it. So he gave it to a gallery, an art gallery. It was a very good piece, and they were happy to accept it. Now he goes to the art gallery, and he enjoys it again. It's a strange story, you see. But actually it's a story that probably could be retold by many of us, that we tend often to lose the desire to appreciate things once we own them. I don't know why it is, but it's covetousness, you see. That there are a lot of things, the greatest treasures of our life are things that we don't have to possess, and as a matter of fact, they're things that we don't possess and don't own. You don't own the sun, the sunset, the moon, the stars, Central Park, all the beauties that are around if you have eyes to see. Things that are in the art gallery, whatever. You don't own these things, but they're there, and you can appreciate them and accept them and become a part of them, and they become a part of your life. Now actually, this, I think, is a very important thing to understand about ourselves. We're not saying that one should no longer want things, that he shouldn't desire to better himself at all, because every person has a desire to grow, and in our culture, growth usually means some kind of expansion and development and so forth, and this is natural. But the important thing is to know that if we hunger and thirst after righteousness or right use of the law, and if we turn the covetousness toward a greater awareness of the divine process, the flow of God, and at the same time, with all of the thorns out of the covetous attitude toward things, the jealousy of people because of what they have, the envy, the desire to get this and that and the other, that now we can look out into our world and we can see the beauties of things that people have, homes, apartments, cars, and so forth, appreciate them, take them into our consciousness, rejoice in them, be a part of them. And now we've fulfilled what the treasure map idea intended. Because now we develop a consciousness in which this is comfortable, because we've already lived in it without owning it. And it becomes a comfortable thing. And then in the flow of the divine process, we then draw to us easily, effortlessly, without the strain and the tension and the worry and the anxiety, these things perhaps, or in most cases, things that are so much better, but so much better for us, because they become a part of us. And one of the problems, you see, of this covetous approach to life and to things is that when we are envious with what someone else has, essentially, because deep at the heart of us our greatest desire is to be, we are envious of what we think this thing implies about him. So we're envious about what he is, not what he has. Because we want to be. We want to be somebody. Everybody inwardly hungers to be himself. But we've been so conditioned in our society against being ourselves. Out here is where it is, not in yourself. Be like this, be like that, get in step, follow the styles, put on the right dresses, the right ties, go to the same plays, read the right books, and all this sort of thing. We're so conditioned to this outward parade of experiences in life that most of us have totally neglected the deep inner desire to be ourselves, And covetousness, in an outer materialistic sense, is the big culprit. Because we're always wanting to be like that, which covers itself by have what that is and have what that is. But inwardly we want to be ourselves. And there is nothing that you can do. The best possible imitation of another person has nothing to compare with the simple expression of what you are. You can be the absolute perfect imitation of the greatest person who ever lived, but it can't even hold a candle to just being you, because you are a divine original, you see. So the only way, really, to overcome this covetous approach to life is to get seriously involved in the desire and need to be ourselves, to know God as ourselves. So it's not just a case of hungering and thirsting for God in terms of some kind of psychic experiences or divine forces or, oh, isn't God great? Quite often people will turn from the attitude of envy and jealousy out here to turning their envy and jealousy toward God and saying, oh, isn't he so great? He's so wonderful. At the same time inferring about themselves, but I'm such a clod. I'm a nobody. God is great. God is almighty. I'm always suspicious of people who talk so much about how great God is. Because almost invariably this is a person who really doesn't think very much of himself. Now maybe that's a generalization, but as I say, I'm suspicious from people that I've known. The important thing is to get the sense of rejoicing in God who is expressing himself as you. God as a flow, as a process, and you are the expression of that process. So there's a healthy appreciation. So often in our spiritual seeking, people tend to follow this same acquisitive urge, turning away from things of the world and turning toward the spiritual people of the world. And so then we begin to jealously hunger and thirst after the guru and the master and the great holy place and so forth, and we find ourselves again outwardly where we've stopped worshiping money. Now we're worshiping symbols and worshiping people and worshiping all sorts of spiritual experiences, all of which are out here. It's one of the great problems of what some people call the guru worship or the master worship or the great teacher worship, where the teacher or the saint or the master or the guru is always sitting on a throne way up above everybody else, passing out his little jewels, and everybody is bowing down and acknowledging and worshiping and so forth. Well, I know there's so much of this involved in religion. And maybe again I cut against the grain a little bit to even mention it, but we're talking about covetousness, and I believe that's a part of it. Because it leaves us empty as ourselves. One can get all the wisdom from the person in terms of all that he has to give and all the great glamour that goes with it, in the same way as we can get all the money and things from the world and still be totally empty in ourselves. Still feel that we're nobodies. Oh, I feel more like a somebody when I'm with that person, but still I'm a nobody. And so we're involved in another form of covetousness. Covetous, again, going back to its root, is the passionate desire The important thing is we want to desire passionately to find the activity of God in us, expressing through us and as us. The passionate desire to be ourselves, to know ourselves, to enjoy ourselves, to feel the sense that we are at the center of a divine activity, and knowing that as we feel that sense of security of the first commandment, having only one God, worshiping Him only, the second commandment, no false images or false gods, and all the way through the commandments, secure in that realization of the relationship, and then knowing, as Jesus says, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. All that otherwise we would covet out here, the things, the relationships, and the people, come easily to us when we have the consciousness of our own wholeness, because then we become attractive in a magnetic sense, and attractive in a personality sense too. We attract friends, we attract loved ones, we attract the right jobs, we feel a sense of security in where we go, because our orientation is always within ourselves. We know who we are. We feel secure in ourselves. And we walk easily through the changing circumstances of life without fear and without anxiety. And without constantly saying, gee, if I just had that, things would be so different. If I could just get that job, oh, if I could just have that person love me, how different everything would be. And it's all out here. And as long as we are in that direction in consciousness, we're on a treadmill. And you know as well as I know that the more you hunger after that and that and that, it goes on and on and on and on, and you spend the rest of your life saying, when that happens, I'll be happy. And when that happens, I'll be happy. And that and that and that and that, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. And it never happens. So you're never really happy. Because you've hooked yourself into this conditioned process that life is lived from the outside. And on the outside, it's always changing, coming, going, and there's no way to hold on to it. But when you redirect that thought, the covetousness, if you will, to hunger and thirst after your own inner flow, the activity of spirit flowing forth as you, then you know happiness for the first time. And it's a happiness that comes from a divine happening that is continuous in you. Never stops, never ceases. There's never any cessation of it. You don't have any less of it when you spend your money, when you create something, when you give something, because it's always there, because you're in the flow of it, because you know who you are. Well, as you see, covetousness is a tremendous realization. We'll just close with this reference in Jean Renoir's moving film of India, The River. There's a scene where a crippled American soldier is raving against the fate that has overtaken him. And he asks a Hindu girl what he can do to make life worthwhile. And she answers in the one word that seems to sum up all the difference between East and West: consent. Consent. To actually give consent to the flow of the divine process in you. In other words, to let life happen, to accept today, to accept yourself, to accept where you are and what you are as the best possible and only starting place to go forth to be what you would like to be. As long as we feel that what we want is out there and do not start with where we are here, then we're coveting, and we've cut ourselves off from the flow. We need to learn, if we can sort of change the words of Sir William Osler, we need to learn to live in now-tight compartments, to accept this moment as the moment, and accept ourselves as good enough as the starting point. And in that way, we begin to really rejoice in a process of unfoldment in us, which will eventuate in the projection and the attraction out here in the world, and we will draw to us all the things that otherwise we may spend all of our lives coveting. But never feel possessed by them. Never feel that that thirst for this, I've got to have that, I don't care what it costs, I just must have it, that's covetousness. And in the end, in investing our whole self in that approach, the great expense or the great price we're paying is not the investment, not the indebtedness that may come with it, the time payments that go on for the next 36 months, but the fact that we've cut ourselves off from the flow. And that's tragic. That's why we're told, do not covet. Hope you'll think a little bit about this idea of covetousness. I think it's very important of the commandments. All right, now, just as we go on our way tonight, I want you to join with me for a moment. I'd just like you to remember that you are established in the divine flow, that there is only one presence and one power, one substance, one life, one love, one source of good, God the good, omnipotent. And we know that you are consciously living in and reacting to and projecting in all your ways the flow of this activity. And so you walk in peace. You are free from fear, free from anxiety, free from inordinate desire for things, free to be yourself and to unfold from within yourself all the good that otherwise you may desire and which may come easily to you. Walk in this consciousness under the circle of God's love and protection and direction and peace. And we bless you in this. Amen.